How should QA be involved in product development? How has QA changed? How is it shifting left? How should developers work with the QA team? How should the QA team be involved in product planning and have a product mindset? How can we apply a product driven mindset to QA? That's what we're going to talk about today on Product Driven. To survive and thrive, you must adopt a product driven mindset. Welcome back to Product Driven. Today I'm talking to Jay Eigner, who is the founder and CEO of JDA QA. I think he wants to be known as the QA guy of Philly. If you ever have any kind of QA problem, he's the guy. So have him here today to help us, how can we use QA to make a better product? That's what we want to talk about today. Jay, welcome to the show, man.
One of my favorite people. What's up, man? Thanks for having me.
So I guess my first question for you today, our topic is to talk about how do we use QA to build a better product? And my first question is, do you think software developers are good at testing their own code?
That's like a landmine right out of the gate, man. You really want me to, this is a divisive, they'll be like, this is a spicy episode of Product Driven.
I mean, you can just say F no and we can just...
I will say that I think that they can test it in ways that maybe QA people don't think about. It's a very technical way typically of thinking about it. Maybe there's some kind of bounds to, the code that they wrote that they know about that QA people don't know about. So, they can certainly test it. Now, would I trust that I want to hand off software to a client that's only been tested by the development team? I would say probably not.
Well, but we're also seeing this trend where things are shifting left, right? Like, you think about software development a little bit like an assembly line. And it's like you get the requirements, the developers write all the code, and then they throw it over to QA, and QA is supposed to figure out if it actually works. But there's kind of a trend of shifting that more earlier in the cycle or more to the developers in some sense, right?
Yeah, I think if you're exposing anybody in the process to the QA mindset and what they're going to be running, I think the better you are. I think it's org specific too. I remember one of my previous companies, I used to call it in-cube testing, and we would literally sit in the developer's cube. They would check in a commit and be like, hey, it's on this machine. Can you check it out? And it would just be this live, back and forth kind of thing. And it feels like that's where things have kind of looped back around to. And I know other orgs didn't do that back then because I worked at those too. But it's definitely like that. The feedback loop is just shortened every time you go up another level in the chain of product software development. So, even in UX and requirement gathering, like having somebody who's representing the customer and has seen the platform and probably knows it better than just about anybody else, it would be a wasted resource not to use them as early as possible.
Well, another part of this trend is SDET or software development in testing. Is that something that your company helps people do a lot of?
Yes, I think that's a interesting title. I don't know if I've ever really fully embraced what that means. I think there's more technical QA people than others. I think, some are really technical, some are just manual folks. And I think we distinguish, manual and automated, right? That's the right. Kind of the two. SDET is an interesting one. And I think it feels like it comes from the corporate world or something. It was just kind of handed down and fell out of the sky somewhere. But yeah, as far as developers being exposed to the QA processes and what we're doing, I think it's super helpful. But I think having those super technical people that can automate very long, tedious manual processes are, they're a different breed, and I don't know that SDET covers that in my book. But yes, to long story short, I think they're very important in the process.
Well, clearly there's a lot of different kinds of applications, and how you do testing varies wildly from one type of application to another, right? But one of the things that we have definitely seen a trend of over the last few years is things went from Selenium and all these kind of older clunky ways of doing things to now using Playwright and Cypress and some other tools that make it easier for the developers to kind of do them as a pseudo scripting language and check into the repository and be sort of part of the artifacts that go along with the code though, right? And to some sense that almost makes it easier for the developers to quickly do some of that and kind of encourages them to do that. Do you think that's what is kind of driving that?
Yeah, I think so. My biggest concern there is always that you want an auditor, right? You want somebody who's not creating the house to do the inspection, right? It's great, and I think there's certainly applications where it makes sense, and it's great for developers to write as many tests as they can, but like every test that they write, they're not writing new product code too, right? So it's like you're going to have to scale out your development team even more if they're sitting there writing automated tests when you could have a dedicated team that's kind of like auditing these people's software as they write it. So it's somewhere in the middle, I think. But yeah, I think it certainly has its benefits.
Yeah, I always describe this as it's like an ownership thing, right? It's like who wakes up every day and cares about this problem? And if you're a software developer, you don't care about QA from this perspective, right? You wake up every day and you want to go build stuff. You want to build new product features, write code, do this. You don't wake up every day and you're like, I'm going to go figure out how to break Jay's code and then I'm going to tease him all afternoon about it. Like, you also need that guy.
You do need that guy. I will say I think we're less antagonistic in 2024 than we have been.
That's how QA always feels to me. What are you talking
about? It
always
has been that way, and that was the world that I think we grew up in. It was very much an us versus them. But I think these days, like most developers I know or talk to or work with, appreciate that second level of of kind of sanity checking on the things that they're doing, because 30 years ago, nobody knew who the hell wrote whatever software you were using, right? But today, you can very easily figure out who the developers were on a project that made this really crappy software. And if your name's tied to it, then, it's not going to be a great look. So I think we've gained a lot of trust and respect and communication over the years with developers. And I think that's just, I think it's a really good thing for the industry as a whole.
So it's okay for developers to love QA people now?
I think that they should. I mean, especially if they're me. I think they should love me. But yes, I think it should be a team environment, which it feels more of these days than it ever has.
Well, you mentioned something earlier. I think it's really important. We talk about getting QA involved earlier and earlier in the process. And I think if organizations do it the right way, the QA team almost becomes part of the product team. And on the product driven channel here, that's one of the things we're always talking about is like, how do we take a product mindset to everything? And really your QA people should be product experts. Like they should know the product almost better than anybody else does. And so when they're going to test it, they have like all this experience with the product that they can bring to that. And if they're involved early in the process, they're like, okay, I understand this is what we're going to be building. I wait for the developer to build it and then I help validate. And I was part of the whole process, right? Yep. Where in the early days, you think about kind of the assembly line of this thing, there's like, I don't know, some crap got thrown over the wall at me and now I got to figure out what this thing was, right? But if QA is highly embedded in the entire process, it can provide so much more value.
And it's so easy to do. It's not like you have to go, I don't know, like invest in some big new thing. You're literally having QA people in your team that are already there, interact with people who are already there, just in a different meeting. In a different context. And it's like, it's a free thing, right? I mean, they have to attend the meetings, you have to pay for their time, but like in reality, like the benefit you get from a guy who uses the software every day and knows where the skeletons are in the closet, by the way, not just like Joe Schmo who downloads your app and uses it. Like I also know that, if I enter the wrong combination of things on the screen, it's going to crash. We bring context and a lot of just general use cases that may not be thought of back up into the cycle. Again, it's just like shortening the feedback loop. The shorter you can get it, the better. And you almost get a shortcut. And I mean, as a former product guy, at some point in my life, I don't think you can really validate anything until it gets in your customer's hands. But you can certainly unvalidate or invalidate something very early in the process and say, this isn't going to work and it's going to break because we've seen this before. So I think that's a real big benefit of having QA, further up in the chain.
But I think we have the same problem with software developers, though. They're not as involved in the product planning in the earlier stages. And some of that's an organizational problem. Some of it is at fault of the developers because they're not asking enough questions. They're not curious enough. They're not asking why. And that's one of the things that I try and focus about on this channel about the importance of this. And it's the same thing with the QA, right? Like you can't have QA or the developers, either one, that are just sort of sitting around waiting for like, hey, tell me exactly what to do and I'll go do it.
Right.
If you have them very involved in the entire process, then they can add so much more value. Like there's like a 2 to 10x more value here by them just asking why, being curious, why are we building this way? Why did we plan it this way? Who's going to use it? I need to understand all the details, not just sitting around like hoping that somebody's going to tell you this stuff, which I think is the default way that this usually plays out.
I think that's fair. Do you think that some personality types just don't care though? And like they feel burdened by that like extra business layer when they just want to build stuff?
I think there's some, and I mean, I think there's some people in all walks of life of all jobs that are like, I want to do the minimum there is to do. Tell me exactly what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it until 4:55 p.m. and then I'm out of here.
Right.
Right? Like there will always be those people, but the ones that really want to excel and advance in their career and all those sort of things are the ones that've got to be curious and asking why. Why are we doing this? I want to understand everything there is to know so I can be better at my job.
Yeah. Well, I think you nailed it too, though. The receptiveness of the business and the business people to answer those questions is the key. I've worked at so many orgs where I hear that. I hear, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? But it's all like intern, the team is asking that amongst themselves when they have no idea why they're doing this from a business perspective. So you automatically kind of lose some buy-in, you lose some like motivation, you lose some like, some real passion for what you're doing, because you're just like you said, you're just checking the boxes and you go home. But if the business is receptive and they're like, this is why we're doing these things, this is the value it's going to bring to the customers, then like you said, the good developers are going to buy into that and be even better than they already are.
And you highlight the problem that we're trying to focus on this channel. And more often than not, all this starts from a leadership perspective, right? Whoever is the engineering leader, QA leader, whoever these people are, they have to drive this mindset. They have to have a little more meetings and include a little more people, ensure everybody in the room understands, why are we doing this? Are they asking the right questions? And that's the thing at Full Scale. I always harp on our developers about. It's like, you guys have to ask the questions. You can't show up to these meetings and don't ask any questions, or when somebody tells you what to do, you don't ask any questions. Because if you're not asking questions, you're not clarifying what needs to be done. You're not validating assumptions. You're not collaborating, and you may not be adding much value to any of these meetings, right? Like, you could have just read the Jira ticket. So this time is for collaboration. Like, I think that's the big thing, is companies have got to use this time for collaboration, and it's all about the understanding of why and asking the questions.
Yep, love that.
Well, another question I have for you, your company does a lot of various types of manual and automated testing for a lot of different people. What advice do you have for somebody that's trying to figure out, what should I test? Like, I'm building all these software features. When should I test them? How should I test them? Like, what kind of advice do you give people?
Prioritization of user functionality that's like actually used by your customers is kind of the start to it. And we kind of onion out from there. Like, if we're coming into a client, they go, we don't even know. And that's some of our engagements are like, tell us how we would test this, right? For some bigger like pharma companies, like, here's our problem. Like, what the hell do we even do with it? So understanding the product, building a list of kind of prioritized feature sets that need to get covered, making sure you have a really robust test plan for that. And it sounds like kind of rudimentary in 2024, but you'd be shocked at the number of like bigger organizations that still use like spreadsheets and just like have a bunch of like stuff all over the place. So like having a kind of a test case management repository so you can have some traceability and reporting around your test cases that are being run. It's just it's the basics. It's like football, right? It's like every time you hear a coach talk, they talk about like blocking and tackling and like the kind of standard stuff. It's the same thing with QA. It's like, build the test plan around prioritized use cases, validate those with the product owners and the customers if you can, and just make sure you're really embedded with the software development lifecycle wherever you are. Make sure you have QA represented, like we talked about, as early as possible. But at the most part, you're going to be handing stuff off to QA after it gets developed, and you really just have to make sure that you're testing the right stuff that matter to your customers, not the link on the 50th page on a footer somewhere. Like, that's not the thing that we need to worry about finding and documenting today. We can do that, but like, start with the things that are going to save you clients and headaches going forward.
Well, that was my next question, though, is how often do companies end up spending a lot of time testing things that don't matter? Or it feels to me it's all like software development. Like, you have a certain amount of resources and they're very limited. And if you're investing a lot of time in building features for your customers that they don't really need or they don't really care about, or it's weird maintenance or technical debt stuff that we could live without, it's like, then you didn't build the things that really mattered. Like, you deprioritize the most important things. Like, what kind of things do you see people test that like they probably shouldn't test? Like, they're sort of wasting their time.
That's a really good question. And I think it's obviously org/platform specific. I would say that as the size of the org grows, probably similar to software development, those things start to creep in more and more and more. And then when you get up to enterprise, you're like, guys, we're we're running.
We need 3,000 test cases.
3,000 test cases with 30 testers that are running them 40 hours a day, and we have an automation team over here that's like trying to like catch up and like build, you know, the automated test to make the 30 guys work faster and more efficient. It's just like this weird vicious cycle because they think they have to test everything on every release. I would say the kind of to answer your question directly, that starts with a real understanding of the code base with the developers to know what stuff is not going to, you know, what can I build my regression around? What do I need to run every single time that comes out, right? Like, what are the key functionality, obviously. But the real wasted time we've seen comes from people running these entire org level suites every time they release. And that may be a development problem. Maybe they're not, you know, things aren't kind of segmented in a way that like they can test, maybe have some big legacy monolithic application. But I would say the biggest place we see wasted time is not understanding which modules need to be tested for a release and going through a giant, I mean, you know, we're working with clients now that we're helping, you know, take from 12-week release cycles because of how big their testing plans are down to 2 weeks in regular sprints. So, I mean, you can just imagine 10 weeks of extra stuff that's being tested because you've actually pared down the things that are important for this release as opposed to this giant, you know, crazy test plan you have.
All right, I got another interesting question for you.
Sure.
Do you think manual testing is going away?
Never. Never in a million years.
I don't either. It's
Never.
not going away. They
can't. I mean, are you going to, like, it's I don't know. I don't want to get into AI conversation too deep, but it's the people who use the tools, right? It's always the people who use the tools that succeed. Like when farming came around, like the guys who would like put the stuff in the ground by hand, like they weren't as useful anymore. The guy could use the tool is now the new, you know, so it's the same thing with manual QA. If you can use these tools, human context, I think is really important and intent. And yes, it's getting better and whatever. But I don't ever see anybody being comfortable enough to just trust a machine and trust the process, you know, to quote an awful 76ers organization, to being able to just deploy stuff without humans involved. I don't think that happens.
Well, it highlights the need for that product mindset, right? Like you need that QA person who understands why are we doing this at a higher level, and therefore they can be more effective doing manual QA and maybe using these tools that assist them. But it'd be hard for those tools to do it without all that other knowledge that's needed. That's the key. Yep. And I always say that most AI is really good at doing like 80% of the job, but that's like the first part of the job that's like the easy part. It's like it did the really easy part. It didn't, the last 20% of the job is actually the part that's really, really, really hard.
Yep.
And it does not do.
Yep.
Is kind of my opinion.
I agree.
I think the other thing that is really good about manual QA is that sort of just exploratory testing. It's the like, you know what, I'm going to spend a couple hours this afternoon. I'm just going to go try and break stuff. Like, let's go. Mm-hmm. Like, what can we screw up today? What kind of bugs can we find? Where can we find weird regressions? Like, you still need somebody who does this. Like, it's just still needed, even if you have all the automated tests in the world.
I agree.
Well, Jay, I really appreciate having you on the Product Driven show today. I think we highlighted a little bit of how some things have changed in QA. Development is being more and more involved in it. We have more and more automation. We have some AI tools that are starting to do some of this, but you still need a product mindset of understanding like, well, what does the product do? What does the company do? Why are we here? To apply to all of this. And I think it's really critical. And I think our conversation today really highlighted that. So if anybody's listening and you're totally lost on how to do QA, definitely reach out to Jay. That's his expertise. And Jay, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for being on, brother. Always a pleasure being with you. Thanks, man.
Thank you.